Hello everyone, this is a video about TL semicolon DR, or teal deer. You see, because it's a teal deer. Yeah. And in particular, this video is a response to his video, Anita Sarkeesian Doesn't Understand How to Be a Feminist, concerning Anita Sarkeesian's speech at the How to Be a Feminist panel at All About Women 2015. But before we get to that, well, you know the drill by now. So the videos I'm asked to respond to broadly fall into two categories. There's the, for want of a better word, intellectual videos. You know, they cite studies and news stories and sources and at least attempt some sort of academic defense of their positions. And on the other hand, we've got the peanut gallery, the hecklers. And what they do is watch someone, usually a feminist, and usually Anita Sarkeesian, to be honest, say a sentence, and then they cut away to a cartoon animal doing the DreamWorks face, and they say a naughty word. And I've honestly struggled to come up with a response to this sort of video. You know, quite a few people have suggested that I look at Bering, and well, let's briefly look at Bering. And here's one of his responses from his video, The Young Turks Have Finally Lost the Plot.
And listen to you, or be near you, or whatever. Okay, fine, try to make that case. It's stupid, but you can make that case. If they're claiming that day that they're a man or a woman or whatever.
You know, your face just pisses me right off, cunt. Fuck you.
You know, how do you respond there? What could I possibly say back to that? Or this?
They're trying to pretend that it's only so that guys can go into women's bathrooms. No, that's not the way that being transgendered works.
Suck a bucket of dicks, you fuckhead. I'm not even going to argue with you.
You know, there's no argument here, it's just mindless preaching to the choir. It's not substantive enough to get a grasp on. And well, I'll be honest, I've not watched all of Bering's videos, so maybe I'm being unfair. If he has ever made anything better than that, someone please let me know. Absent an argument, I guess one way to respond to these heckling videos is to turn the particular shtick of whichever heckler it is back on themselves. But I don't want to do that with Bering, because it'd just be me calling him a dickhead for 20 minutes, and I don't think anyone really wants to watch that, and I don't want to make that either. It'd be entirely too negative. But with Teal Deer, I think I've found my man. You see, Teal Deer has a particular quirk that I have no problem at all with turning back on him. You see, he's a pedant.
As a woman on YouTube, I would describe my experience as careful, empowering, brave.
Right, I'm gonna go full grammar Nazi autist on this because I can. Careful and brave are not experiences. Those are methods of acting. They are a way of being. It's not something that you experience. The actual sentence that you'd want to use would be, my experience on YouTube has involved me needing to be careful. My experience on YouTube required me to be brave.
It's realizing that being a feminist is a lifelong learning endeavor, and that we will make some mistakes on the way, and we should be compassionate to ourselves when that happens.
And speaking of mistakes that you make, Anita, I really think that you should look up the definition of the word compassion, because it doesn't mean what you think it means.
That's right, a pedant, an honest-to-God, old-school, dictionary-quoting pedant. And that's going to be our angle right there. We're going to be smug and pedantic, right back at Teal Deer. And I admit, I'm cheating a bit here by responding to a video about Anita Sarkeesian, who, for whatever reason, always brings out the worst in these guys. She's the red rag to the dumb YouTube bull. Or deer, in this case. So let's get to it.
So throughout high school and college, I was involved with clubs, organizing against wars in the Middle East, raising awareness about climate change, and demanding gay and lesbian rights.
Ah yes, because women have truly always been the primary victims of war. They are also quite obviously the group most affected by climate change. And it's a well-documented fact that homosexual men need feminism. The only thing that you've mentioned there that even comes close to being an issue for feminism is lesbian rights, and that is purely because some lesbians may choose to identify themselves as being feminists. But you do realize that you can be a lesbian and not a feminist, right? So you really shouldn't presume to speak for all lesbian women everywhere, you heterosexual oppressive shitlord. After all, nothing quite says I'm fighting for equality like speaking over all of those marginalized voices.
So we're off to a good start. Anita says she was involved with a bunch of social justice causes, and then TLDR cuts in to explain how he thinks those causes aren't feminist causes. And there's a problem here. TLDR cut Anita off in the middle of a sentence. You see, the start of Anita's speech reads like this. But that's not the end of the sentence right there. She goes on to say, so I was heavily involved with social justice causes, but I still didn't call myself a feminist. Now, nowhere here is the implication that Anita does actually think that, say, climate change, for instance, is a feminist cause. She's merely listing some social justice causes she was involved with. The implication being that one might expect someone who is heavily involved with a bunch of social justice causes to be a feminist. However, Anita's point is that despite being involved with these various causes, she wasn't a feminist. Cutting in to explain how those issues don't make you a feminist is jumping the gun because that was her point. She wasn't a feminist. You see, TLD is responding to only a sentence fragment here, so he got the wrong end of the stick and thought that the examples Anita listed were exclusively examples of what she thinks are feminist causes. But they weren't, or at least they weren't necessarily. I mean, Anita might think that war, for instance, is a feminist issue, and there's plenty of arguments for that. One of the arguments for that is that it's mostly men who are expected to go and fight in wars, which TLDR actually mentioned incorrectly, thinking that he was contradicting the idea that war is a feminist issue. But, you know, there are other arguments. The necessary relaxation of some traditional gender roles during wartime is certainly an interesting feminist issue, in my opinion. And I say in my opinion because it's just my opinion. Something to keep in mind going forward is that there is no one fixed meaning of feminism. Whether or not certain issues are feminist issues is arguable. You know, feminism at a fundamental level is an idea. There is no feminism element on the periodic table. There are no feminism atoms we can look at under a microscope to see if something is actually really feminist or not. Is this pedantic enough for you all, by the way? It's basically this for the rest of the video, I'm afraid, and I'm very sorry. You know, everything seems trivial after the election. I need to do a lazy one to get back into it. I'll get back to responding to something worthwhile soonish. Leave me alone. Let's move on.
So, like most people who grew up immersed in the neoliberal ideology of the West.
What? Neoliberal ideology of the West. Let's just break that one down for a moment, shall we? Neo, meaning new. Liberal, the idea that the world should be governed on a principle of liberty and equality for all people. And this is supposed to somehow be a bad thing to think. Oh wait, what am I saying? Of course it's bad, because it's the patriarchy, right? But wait, hang on, what is modern feminism? Well, it's new, so we could certainly describe it as being a neo-ideology, and it keeps saying that it wants to push for equality for all people, so yeah, that word actually kind of encompasses modern feminism as well. I know you're trying to invent a load of bullshit nonsense buzzwords that people can then go home and throw out on their Twitter and Tumblr accounts to try and make themselves look intellectual while they're talking about some mythical patriarchy, but I really don't think you've even considered what these words actually mean.
Someone doesn't know what neoliberal means. Ah ha ha ha. And man, this one takes me back. So long-time Shaun and Jen watchers will remember my take on Leafy's video about Milo Stewart. And in the course of making that video, I had to read thousands of Leafy's comments. And one thing I saw over and over again was people who were confused by Milo's language. You know, Milo's just making up all of those big words to seem clever. And this shows how sheltered and kinda arrogant, to be honest, that I was at the time, because the first few of those comments that I read, I assumed were jokes. I was like, what big words? You know, not that Milo isn't well spoken or anything, but nothing he said was all that complicated. Or so I thought, anyway. I now realise that it's all relative, of course. A lot of concepts are just new to a lot of people. There's nothing wrong with that. It's entirely possible to have just not encountered the word neoliberalism before. There's no shame at all in being ignorant of that concept. What there is shame in is assuming that because you haven't heard of it before, it must therefore be a bullshit buzzword someone else is just making up to look smart, and then breaking it apart into its component pieces in an attempt to decipher its meaning, rather than just admitting ignorance and looking it up. Now, of course, YouTube commenters were quick to point out TLD's mistake, which led to him claiming it was just a joke. Which led to the rather obvious follow-up question, what was the joke? And I guess after getting a bunch of comments explaining his mistake, TLD got sick of it and added the following disclaimer to the video description. To all the people telling me I don't know what neoliberalism is, you missed the joke, so here it is, spelled out for you. She's ignoring the actual definition of neoliberalism and contorting it into some nebulous term regarding oppression and privilege, and basically ignoring the economic aspect of it, so I simply redefine it as well, so it can quite easily include herself. Which, well, that's not actually true, is it, TLD? Because you explicitly accused Anita of inventing the term. Sorry, the bullshit buzzword.
I know you're trying to invent a load of bullshit nonsense buzzwords that people can then go home and throw out on their Twitter and Tumblr accounts to try and make themselves look intellectual while they're talking about some mythical patriarchy.
You see, what actually happened here was Anita Sarkeesian knew something that you didn't know. In this one instance, Anita Sarkeesian was smarter than you. But of course, TLD can't possibly admit that because that would unravel his whole video, the foundation of which is that Anita Sarkeesian has to be an idiot. So he has to do the just a joke defense, you know, I was just kidding, it was just satire, I was doing the Socratic method. I don't know what I was doing, but whatever it wasn't not knowing something. Also, two more points. Firstly, Anita is not ignoring the economic aspect of neoliberalism because she goes on in her speech to draw explicit comparisons between the neoliberal economic ideas of individualism and privatization and the individualist ideas of choice feminism. Secondly, TLD mentions the actual definition of neoliberalism, so pray silence everyone for Professor Dictionary, the inventor of all the words, come to tell us what they actually mean. You see, if you do what TLD should have done and Google neoliberalism, you can read all about it for free, and one of the first things that Wikipedia tells us about the term is this. The definition and usage of the term has changed over time, and it goes on to lay out all the differing and changing meanings of the word neoliberalism. Speaking of definitions of words,
Back then, I thought sexism basically boiled down to a few bad apples with misguided personal beliefs born out of ignorance or overt hatred.
Right, stop there. That is exactly what sexism is. Just like racism. Just like homophobia. They are not the wider pervasive views of society. They are the views of a select few vast minority of society.
So that's what sexism, racism and homophobia mean for anyone who was wondering. They're not societal or cultural problems, they're merely individual problems, and that's all. And that's quite nice, isn't it, to finally have that issue resolved. However, TLD later quotes the dictionary definition of the word compassion at Anita in an attempt to catch her out on something, and he uses Google's dictionary feature for this. So let's see what Google's dictionary feature thinks of the word sexism. And here's their example of the word sexism in a sentence. Sexism in language is an offensive reminder of the way the culture sees women. And while we're at it, let's just see what dictionary.com thinks of the word sexism. Ingrained and institutionalized prejudice against or hatred of women. So the dictionaries, at least, seem to think sexism is more than just an individual problem. Hey, you know, the dictionary. Quote it when it agrees with you, and quietly ignore it when it doesn't.
With the help of some amazing mentors and by reading a lot of feminist writing, especially the words of women of color and queer women from around the world,
because the opinions of white women and straight women are apparently lower on the hierarchy of importance than all of those people. Also, you know what? I'm starting to lighten up to this idea of calling folks people of colour and queers, because now when I want to go on a good old-fashioned nigger lynch or fag drag, I can use the correct terminology. Thanks, feminism, you fucking bigots.
So I don't really know what was going on with that last bit. I think it was just a joke that didn't quite hit the mark there, to put it lightly. But let's address the part before that, where Anita says she especially read the words of women of colour and queer women from around the world. And TLDR takes this to mean that Anita is discounting the words of straight white feminists. However, this is another example of TLDR cutting Anita off in the middle of a sentence. You see, the rest of Anita's sentence reads like this, and it's the intersecting social systems bit that I really want you to pay attention to here. It's not that Anita's saying the words of straight white feminists don't matter, it's that they're not enough by themselves. She's saying you need a bunch of different viewpoints from different people. So the words of women of colour and queer women would be especially important for someone trying to understand interacting social systems, because they will have particular insights about things like race and sexuality that you wouldn't necessarily get if you exclusively read the works of straight white people.
Unfortunately, many contemporary discourses in and around feminism tend to emphasize a form of hyper-individualism, which is informed by that neoliberal worldview.
You are really offended by this idea that people can and do think for themselves, aren't you? Or is this just some sort of subtle manipulative way of you trying to say, yeah, it's okay for you to think for yourself, as long as what you think agrees with me? Because if you agree with me, that's the only way that you're not going to be a hyper-individual, neoliberal shitlord.
And this part represents the main misunderstanding of TLDRs here. TLDRs here. Anita is going to go on to denounce so-called choice feminism and argue that feminists have a responsibility beyond the individual. Now, key to this idea is that individual actions do matter quite a lot. That's the whole point, in fact, that individual actions have ramifications beyond the individual. Anita's argument here relies upon the existence and importance of individuals. TLDR completely misses this and thinks Anita is arguing that individuals don't or shouldn't exist and that feminism should be some sort of Borg collective. And he does this a lot. So to save coming back to this point over and over again, let's go non-linear and quickly bang through some of the other times he gets hung up on this individual point.
Because the individual choices of individual women do not matter. The only thing that matters is the public image and branding of feminism, which is more important than the freedom of choice, autonomy, and liberty of any woman. Bend your knee and submit, puny mortal women. Submit to your goddess queen feminism. There you go, straight from the horse's mouth. You as a woman cannot be entrusted to empower yourself. Saint Sarkeesian will decide what will empower you for you, because you are too weak, pathetic, and stupid to be trusted, and any action that you take that is not directly approved by Saint Sarkeesian could risk damaging the holy image of feminism. You actually have no concept of the individual, do you? All you can see is the collective, and anything that is not of the collective is against the collective. You don't even seem to want women within that collective to identify as being individual women. You just want them to be one large congealed...
Okay, you get the point. He says it a lot. And I think the only other point to be made here is TLDR's completely ridiculous stretching of Anita's words to their most absurd possible extent. Anita's language is actually very measured and restrained. Too restrained, in my opinion. You know, she'll say something like, some choices might possibly have negative ramifications, and TLDR responds hysterically, casting her as some sort of self-declared feminist dictator. And I wonder if it's just feminism that sets him off, or if TLDR takes this approach to every sentence he hears. You know, for instance, if I say, I'm quite tall.
Ah, right. So Shaun thinks he's the tallest man who has ever lived on the entire planet in human history.
It was quite nice of TLDR to stop by there for that little cameo, wasn't it? He's got a good sense of humour about himself, at least. Anyway, let's go back in time to where we left off.
Okay, so this is the part where I say things that may ruffle some feathers.
So after demonizing the white man, dehumanizing women, people who aren't white and people who aren't straight, down to the point that they have no autonomy of their own, this is the point where things are going to get offensive. This is the line in the sand past which the offensive stuff begins, apparently.
Now then, what on earth is he talking about here? Just to pick one point out of that mess, dehumanizing people who aren't straight, down to the point where they have no autonomy of their own. Where in her speech did Anita do that? I think what he's talking about here is earlier when Anita said she was involved with clubs arguing for gay and lesbian rights, and to which Teal'c responded,
So you really shouldn't presume to speak for all lesbian women everywhere, you heterosexual oppressive shitlord. After all, nothing quite says I'm fighting for equality like speaking over all of those marginalized voices.
You know, is that it? The only other time Anita might have mentioned gay people is when she said that she read the works of queer women. So it's got to be the first one, right? Anita says, I support gay and lesbian rights. And Teal'c responds, so you're dehumanizing gay people to the point where they have no autonomy. That's ridiculous. I thought it was meant to be the social justice crowd who were overly dramatic and easily outraged. Anita is not dehumanizing gay people. She isn't demonizing the white man. In fact, if you read Anita's whole speech, she hasn't even directly mentioned men at all up to now. You know, no offense, Teal'c, but, you know, chill out.
But I think it's a critical discussion to have. So
No, it really isn't. But you know what is a critical discussion to have? The blatant hive mind that is on display in front of us right now. Notice how every single woman is sitting in exactly the same way, bar the one notable exception who is anatomically unable to do so, because her legs are in fact beginning to fuse together in her chrysalis stage, at which point she will emerge as a full-fledged hut. Just an observation. Anyway, let's keep going.
So, completely unnecessary, unfair and tangential attack on an unrelated person aside, I absolutely love the concept of a hive mind, but with exceptions. You know, if we look at the source video and the next wide shot of the whole panel, we see that the two people to Anita's left are sitting differently. Jermaine Greer has both of her feet on the ground, and the person on the end has her legs crossed in the other direction. How did it come to this? So, look at all these women sitting in the exact same way, except for the ones who aren't. 4 out of 7. What a hive mind that is.
the fact of the matter is that some choices have ramifications beyond ourselves and reinforce harmful patriarchal ideas about women as a group and about women's bodies and our wider shared culture. And because of how systems of oppression intersect and compound one another, it's women of color, indigenous women, women living in the global south, women with disabilities, queer women, and trans women who bear the brunt of these ramifications.
So how do you live with yourself? Because you're a white woman, which means you're obviously oppressing every non-white woman. You're of Armenian descent, which means that you are not indigenous to America, and are therefore oppressing all of the people who lived in America before European colonization. You live in the global north, which means you're automatically oppressing everyone in the global south. You're able-bodied, so you're instantly oppressing everyone who is disabled. And as far as I'm aware, you're straight and not transsexual, so you're oppressing every non-straight transsexual in the world. Honestly, with the massive amount of oppression that you're exerting on this world, I'm quite surprised you haven't killed yourself. You know, just from the guilt of it all.
Well, Teal'c, allow me to shed some light on this. You see, Anita said that some choices have ramifications beyond ourselves and reinforce harmful patriarchal ideas about women as a group. And that it's the various minorities and disadvantaged groups she mentioned that bear the brunt of those ramifications. Although if you notice, Anita used the wrong bear in bear the brunt there. Anyway, what she's saying is that some individual choices lead to the ramifications of which the disadvantaged groups bear the brunt. And implicit here is the contrary. Some individual choices do not lead to these harmful ramifications, and it is these choices that Anita Sarkeesian is advocating for. She's explicitly not saying that oppression of minorities is automatic and inescapable. She's saying that one can choose to be aware of these oppressive systems and help put an end to them. So Anita Sarkeesian hasn't killed herself because she thinks that the oppressive systems can be stopped and that she can help to stop them by her choices. You get it? Yeah.
Women can choose from a pre-approved palette, but we cannot meaningfully choose liberation.
Okay, you know what? I am getting really sick of all of this feminism, social justice bullshit. So I am making a patriarchal decision and announcement. As of immediate effect, feminism and social justice warrior are now removed from the patriarchal palette of pre-approved roles that women can fill in society. So I'll give that a couple of days for the message to get around, and then feminism and social justice will just go away, right? Oh, wait. No, it won't. Because this mythological patriarchy palette doesn't fucking exist!
TLD is doing the misunderstanding the patriarchy thing. Seen that one before. A bunch of these dudes hear patriarchy and see this, like a secret male Illuminati who decide everything, and then they project that misunderstanding back onto where they heard the word patriarchy, and they don't bother to go and check if it's right. I think this just comes down to having no faith at all in women's intelligence. You know, any idea they come up with automatically has to be the most stupid possible interpretation of that idea.
It's understanding our own intersections of privilege and oppression and how that will fundamentally change our behaviors and attitudes and values. It's realizing that being a feminist is a lifelong learning endeavor and that we will make some mistakes on the way. And we should be compassionate to ourselves when that happens.
Yeah, mistakes will be made, like demonizing half of the population, and then telling the remaining half of the population that they're too incompetent to be trusted forming their own destiny in life. But you should only be compassionate to yourself when you make those mistakes. And speaking of mistakes that you make, Anita, I really think that you should look up the definition of the word compassion, because it doesn't mean what you think it means.
And here we go. It's the reason I decided to respond to this video. So as I mentioned before, this dictionary is Google's dictionary, the same dictionary that previously disagreed with TLD's narrow interpretation of the word sexism. So here, TLD is upset because Anita said that we, talking about feminists, will make mistakes and should be compassionate to ourselves when that happens, because he thinks the word compassion can only be used with regards to things other than the self. And that is the common understanding of the word. If you just say, you have compassion, the listener will generally assume that you mean for other people. If you want them to understand the idea of having compassion for oneself, you'd need some other words in that sentence, you know, some surrounding context that modifies the meaning of the word compassion. And Anita does seem to have thought of this. Let's see how she starts off, trying to get the idea of having compassion for oneself across to her audience. Compassion, right. But we all know what this means. Sympathetic pity and concern for the sufferings or misfortunes of others. Uh-oh, Anita. Bad start there. You're going to have to do better than that. How are you going to dig yourself out of this hole?
Hang on, what does to mean? A preposition used for expressing aim, purpose, or intention?
Very sneaky, Anita. You see, she's given herself an out. If her next word, whatever it is, differs from the dictionary definition of what it is understood people usually have compassion for, she will have successfully modified the word. Anita Sarkeesian is a literary genius. I can't wait to see what she comes up with next. And holy shit, the roller coaster ride is over. And taking this all together, we understand the idea. We should be compassionate to ourselves. Now, when I make these videos, I usually end up saying something like, if you watch the whole video, the point's clear. But I'm going to have to say to TLD, if you listen to the end of the sentence, the point is clear. Not content with responding to sentence fragments anymore, TLD is now responding just to individual words. Which looks quite fun, to be honest, so I'm going to take a crack at it.
So how to be a feminist.
Aye, of course. That is how Saint Sarkeesian would start off a speech, isn't it? Talking about herself. Oh, don't mind all those other people there, Anita. You just go ahead and make everyone listen to you talk about your favourite topic, yourself. And you know what? I'm sure they will. Look at this hive mind. Just over half of whom are sitting in a similar way, listening with rapt attention as their god empress tells them what they're allowed to think today. Oh, what's this, Anita? You had to do something. You really despise the idea that women can have free agency, don't you? Was it the patriarchy that made you do this unspecified action? I must have missed that meeting. Maybe I was off oppressing everyone by being a straight white male. So go on, Anita. What was it that the evil patriarchy made you do?
Learn.
Oh, you had to learn. Well, how awful for you. I guess it must be difficult for a feminist. Learning things must be some alien concept for you. How evil of men to literally force you to learn something. Oh, but don't let me interrupt you, Anita. Go on. What did you simply have to learn about?
How to be a feminist.
Ah, yes. There we go. Straight from the horse's mouth. Feminism is unnatural. You know what? Somewhere out there in the multiverse, there's a version of my channel with a lot more subscribers. I'll say that. Anyway, let's get back to this, because I do have one more point to make about this, and it concerns the word ourselves. What does ourselves mean? It's a plural pronoun. We or us personally, used to emphasize the speaker and one or more other people considered together. But that's not what Teal'c said. He said yourself.
But you should only be compassionate to yourself when you make those mistakes.
Teal'c really should have said yourselves, plural. Anita is talking about a group of feminists having compassion for themselves, plural, which may include but does not necessarily require each individual to have compassion for themselves, singular. If every feminist feels compassion for all the other feminists, they all feel compassion for themselves, plural, but not themselves, singular, which perfectly fits the dictionary definition of the word compassion. Now, that's not really what I think Anita exclusively meant there. I do think she was also talking about having compassion for oneself, or I guess you could say, self-compassion. Wait, self-compassion? That's a thing? Well, fuck. You see, that's the problem with the dictionary. You think you have it memorized perfectly, and then people keep going around making up new shit.
It's realizing that others will make mistakes, and we should extend that compassion to them as well.
Unless, of course, that person is a straight white male, at which point you can presumably just condemn him to the pits of hell.
Yes. Not really. Straight white guys are the touchiest, most fragile people on this planet, I swear to God. Grow a spine. Outro. Don't know why I said outro. I apologise about this one. I needed a little post-election catharsis, you know. I'll do something more substantial next time. If you'd like to get in touch, send me a... I'm still sick, by the way. Send me a message on Twitter or AskFM. If you're feeling very charitable, there's a donation link on the YouTube banner, but don't donate because of this video. Go and watch one of my better videos and then donate because of that. Right. See ya.